the 28th of March 2022. Hope everybody's doing good. Except for the nuclear industry, of course. Always takes me a minute or two or 10 or 20 minutes to get the show up and running. The worms in Fukushima Prefecture, which means the food you're eating, the worms in those fields was 1.4 million ionizing radioactive atomic decays, or atoms, whatever. Get you to stop and scratch your head for a second. Don't eat food from that shithole known as Japan. Don't trust demons, also known as International Atomic Energy Agency and United Nations. Actual demons. They're actual demons. Real life demons. Don't eat the food. You're Frank Zappa, don't you eat the yellow snow? Don't eat the food around nuclear power plants. Go ahead and eat the friggin' yellow snow. Just don't eat that shit there. Or there. Or in the future, around this future nuclear power plant. Don't eat the food around that creature in the United Kingdom. Or that one. Or, yeah, you guessed it, that one. Don't eat food grown within 1,000 miles of a nuclear power plant is the basic rule of thumb. These are disease factors. This is another new nuclear power plant they're doing in the United Kingdom, surrounded by farms. I'm not laughing. I'm trying not to scream. It's called a gallows laugh, because if you don't, you'll scream. How wicked, eh? To put a nuclear power plant... These big, dirty new ones are dirty reactors, eh? They're planning on using mixed oxide fuel. They don't know where to put that stuff today. Yeah. Plutonium detected all over a village 25 miles from the Meltdowns. Sounds like a good place to buy some rice to me, Dana. Can you make that up on your own? Farmers harvesting rice along thousands of one-ton bags of radioactive waste? Can you make that up on your own, you think? If Fukushima didn't happen? Like, they banned food from 14 prefectures, not just Fukushima. You got any idea how much danger this planet is in? They're shipping the food to all your supermarkets and restaurants and hotels. Saying they hate you is being polite. Let's get it on, I suppose. How about this one? Are you patriotic? Are you a patriot? The depleted uranium, these are dirty bombs that this A-10 Warthog shoots. And they know it too. But it's like we're allowed to do it, Dana. Put this dirty bomb, stupid. Yeah, but we can do it because we're the military. It's legal, Dana. We're allowed to do it, so it's okay for us to do it. We'll be okay. No, you won't, stupid. That's why they hired you, stupid, because you're a zombie. Imagine, like, you're going to liberate people and you fire depleted uranium all over their country. How you liking your freedom, slave? Food price hike poses risk to a developing world. Well, one of the most bizarre things that whatever frig is going on in Europe and Ukraine and Russia has showed us one thing, that the food... Russia and Ukraine are some of the biggest, well, they're the biggest world's exporter of wheat. Of wheat. That means radioactive wheat. No wonder the whole world's dying of all kinds of illnesses. That should just make you hang your head in shame. You should hang your head in humiliation after seeing that. Ukraine, one of the world's biggest exporter of wheat. Ukraine was covered in radioactive waste. So was Britain, but Ukraine is right there. And they're the biggest exporter of food worldwide. Certainly, we covered so many studies over the years on Ukraine. We picked up on that. We didn't realize it was the biggest exporter of disease. What else is new? It's nuclear. You learn something evil about nuclear every minute or so. Particularly on this show, you'll learn it every minute. Or, well, several times a minute typically, if I can shut up and get on with it. Most Japanese back nuclear. Now, come on, man. For the first time since Fukushima. This was a wicked bunch of suits sitting around in the Financial Post. It's from the Financial Post. You literally would be stupid to believe the Financial Post, but they posted this, so we got to yell at them, I suppose. 865,000 extra cancers in 2012, a year after Fukushima nuclear meltdown in Japan. That was an increase of almost 1 million extra cancers. Did they like nuclear power? Were they allowed to vote, I wonder? It's not a real vote, it's just the media trying to drive hype for the stock market for uranium so they can cash out their 10-year-old uranium stocks. For the first time in more than a decade, narrow majority of nuclear plant workers is who they probably interviewed. Now support restarting idle nuclear reactors. Oh yeah. It comes amid a surging power price. And this is an interesting, we've been kind of covering this. I've been reading it all the time now. So what I'm talking about is just, and you'll see it manifest many times just in this show tonight. They're using Ukraine, because Ukraine got nuclear reactors, 15 nuclear reactors in a war zone. The nuclear industry now is trying to do the double talk, and they're saying, Jesus, nuclear is great. We should get some more nuclear, so carbon free. Everybody's like, my God, there's a war zone. Nuclear reactors. So they've been flipping. There's a word for it. It evades me at the moment. It's double talk, right? Double speak. It comes amid surging. Look over here, not over there. It's done on purpose to lull people into complacency. It comes amid surging power prices and warnings of electricity shortages in Tokyo from the earthquake. Japanese public opinions moved decisively against the atomic power after the 2011 earthquake. And, well, first off, they covered the whole thing up. They poisoned everybody. There was an extra 1,000 cancers in the first year. They're still covering it up, and the country realizes they're wicked, but they make up these statistics so that their underdogs can sleep at night, I suppose. Meltdown of the 3 reactors at Fukushima. There's 4. It was reactor 1, 2, 3, and 4. The common spent fuel pool. New pictures that were released in January last year suggest that caught fire and blew up. And reactor 6. Were all redacted in pictures that came out last year. 736 of them. You'll find a video on it in my playlist. When we zoomed in on the pictures, everything was redacted. I've never seen nothing like that in my life. So why did they release it? I guess it was a warning. And then you see this connotation of 3 reactors at Fukushima. That's symmetrically throughout the media. They're going to tell you that. That's simply not true. It was 4 buildings. When you're changing the fuel for what they call a shutdown per se, where they change your fuel, They only take out a percentage of it. They leave the rest of it where it's too. You don't just pick the stuff up and move it whenever you feel like it. And so they leave a lot of fuel in the reactor. These are high-pressure reactors at over 1,000 psi on top of that. So it's very fragile when you get up to these pressures. You don't want to be shifting stuff around during maintenance, so to speak. And then at the top of each building was two, what they call fuel pools, where you got the reactor cores. Some of these reactor cores, you can't move them out of the water for about 150 years. So it's, again, when you see 3 reactors, that's not, whoever wrote that was the media. It wasn't the media that published the story. They didn't write it. The nuclear industry wrote it. Probably the Nuclear Association or World Nuclear News or some one of these lobbying groups would normally write the articles, and it goes into media. Media gets a kickback, and one of their journalists will put their name on the article. And that's too many times we've seen where we researched the person who wrote the article, and they write about cat boxes and cat videos, and they know nothing about nuclear. You got to know nuclear to do this shit. It's a very difficult subject to write these types of articles. And a recent tremor in Japan, tremor. This is a word we've seen injected about 2 days after the March 16th earthquake, 2022, a couple of weeks ago. That was covered up. Over $5.5 billion worth of damage all around, past nuclear meltdowns, but not the nuclear meltdowns themselves. So we're being hit with a plume as we talk right now, because current jet streams whisk it right across. The tremor was a big earthquake that's costing $5.5 billion. That's not a tremor, that's an earthquake. In Japan, the war in Europe is making atomic power look even more attractive. Of course, the war in Europe is making atomic power look frightening. So this is just standard public relation doublespeak to get a certain amount of population lulled back into this envelope of idiocracy. Only 10 nuclear reactors have been restarted under the Fukushima safety rules, which are not really safety rules, they're about terrorists. It's the kookiest shit imaginable. Hey, as long as it shuts down the reactor, what am I, I'm not going to say jack shit. But Japan's 2030 energy goal requires nearly all 333 reactors that out of the 54 that they say can be restarted back online in order to get the 2030 goal, which is part of the Paris Accord, Scumbag France's Paris Accord from 2015, where they cooked up this fable that nuclear was carbon free and that's going to save us, when that's what got us in trouble in the first place, is nuclear. Radiation is climate change. It pulses energy every second. Small group of politicians, a small group of people are pushing and able to position 33 new or older reactors being restarted, right? So it was a small group of people posing as politicians. This is lobbyists gets appointed to these positions to do exactly that. It could take them 3, 4, 10 years, but they'll work at it for 10 years, get it up and running, and sell their shares when the stocks go back up, and in their world, everything is good. It's not capitalism. This is genocide, ecocide, and omnicides we're talking about. Electricity costs are nearly double their 5-year average level due to surge in liquid natural gas and coal. We've seen all commodities just randomly spike at the same time as Putin started the false flag in Ukraine. Japan's earthquake losses may reach $5 billion. It's actually $5.5 billion. 5.4 billion. And from the Fukushima prefecture was 580 buildings that have filed for insurance, and 570 buildings in Miyagi prefecture. These are not houses, but buildings, big buildings they're talking about. So $5.4 billion is not going to be what 1,000 buildings cost, right, from damage, you know what I'm saying? Because you can extrapolate a lot if you can get some basic numbers from these scumbags. The nuclear scumbags. We don't call this the nuclear scumbag show because we couldn't come up with a name. It's the only name that really works. Other impacts from the quake include power, water outages, damages to highway, rail lines, viaducts, and other infrastructures. But not the fragile reactor buildings where the earthquake came ashore. Bloody miracle, I'll tell you what. What's the odds? So that's what's left of reactor 3. They tore that down. They put a cover over it. And we're worried that the remains, fragile remains, and now the fuel pools were at the top of the building, the reactor core. They're claiming they never lost him, but unless you're pretty gullible, you can tell they're gone. And it's the same thing with reactor 4, what's left of it. You can tell the fuel pools that had decades of reactor cores, would have been right there and right there, don't exist, see? Right? And you got to be stupid to not understand that the fuel pools don't exist. If you think the fuel pools are still there, for God's sakes, don't have kids, for goodness sakes. Now leave mommy's computer alone before her boyfriend catches you and kicks the shit out of you. Other impacts from the quake includes power, water outages, damages to highways, rail lines, viaducts, and other infrastructure, blah, 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 blah. To commercial industrial properties was about 1.1 billion. Right, I forgot that. It was located about 100 kilometers from the epicenter of the 2011 event and was preceded by a 6.4 magnitude foreshock about 2 minutes earlier. Now, Japan said it was on a 6.6 scale of the Japanese scale of 7. Now, if you take the Japanese scale, turn it into an international scale, it's a 9.4 on a scale of 10. Sounds a lot worse than a 6.6 on a scale of 7. Even though I don't know why, but apparently it does. It did. It has. It would. It couldn't. It did. Damage estimates are just that, right? Now, we know there's over 1,000 places on the railway lines that had to be repaired, but there was no damage, nothing whatsoever, to Medusa, the 2 Medusa remains. That could cause radioactive plumes to come over here and murder you and your friends and your families and your loved ones in increments over the next decade. This is a plume model based on 20 days of radioactive fallout. They should have let the model run for 40 days, if you ask me, because there wouldn't be anything left there, would there? But they know that most people don't see the world properly, right? And we found out last night that it was 16 of the 17 train cars came off the tracks. Took over a week to get the truth of that to come out. Way past, all of these are way past. The earthquake has to go past the nuclear meltdown to do that. So I'm terrified there's a radioactive plume on the way. Following a powerful earthquake, well, it was powerful everywhere else except for the nuclear meltdown site itself. But everywhere else, though, So thank goodness for that. That's a miracle. 16 of the 17, train cars were jacked off the tracks. And this is the bullet train on top of that. Originally said, no, it's not. I just tilted a little bit. We don't want to take a chance. And turns out 16 of the cars were off the tracks. Like trying to get, when it comes to nuclear, trying to get the truth is almost impossible unless you're an insider who knows your way around and can pick up some of the evidence and build the picture, which is what we do all the time, unfortunately. It'd be pretty cool to sit there and watch somebody dissect the nuclear industry, tell you what. And so we have to do it. The service between Koriyama with 160,000 atomic decays of gamma per square meter currently. They're not measuring alpha or beta or neutron because they're the International Atomic Energy Agency. They don't have to do anything they don't want to. I suppose they're better than everybody. They're the military-industrial complex's little pet lapdog. And who's the military-industrial complex? Is United Nations, 195 militaries. And their little sidekick, pet poodle, is known as NATO, with 30 military-industrial complexes. The service will gradually be resumed by hopefully April the 20th. So you've done damage to the railway lines, the train tracks, the cars. It's going to be down for 5 weeks, but there's no damage to the fragile building with multiple nuclear meltdowns at ground zero where it came ashore. Okay, whatever. German wild boars still contain radiation from Chernobyl as animals adapt to the zone. They're only looking for gamma. The whole nuclear industry needs to be gutted, and don't let them back into the nuclear industry ever again, and fill it up with good people and then try to repair it over the next couple of thousand years. Because that's the prognosis, see? If you fired everybody today, it'll still take you 2,000 years to get a grip on the damage that they've created. So German wild boars are still radioactive. Yeah, because radiation doesn't go away for a million years. 36 years after Chernobyl. The anniversary is next month, this month, April 26th. Have returned to the nuclear zone are displaying curious habits. They're claiming only 10 to 15% of the one species of wild boar population was irradiated. Well, radiation doesn't work that way, pinheads. That's my favorite picture there. I thought it was Helen Caldecott for a minute, but look, you can still see it in there. 30 years on from Chernobyl, Germany's wild boar population remains contaminated. New Scumbag researchers have shown it's actually 100%. You can't get 30% in dose force. 36 years ago, the plant exploded, released radioactive material 400 times more powerful than the atomic bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki into the sky. 400 times, you say? Well, that would mean that the taser bomber was 38 times the amount of radiation as the Hiroshima bomb, which means that the nuclear bomb detonation was 9.5 times more radioactive fallout than Chernobyl. What? Get out of here. But that's true. That's what they're talking about. Now, Chernobyl was a 200-ton reactor. Each of Fukushima's reactors or 800, 800 assemblies. I always say 800 tons, don't I? It's 800 assemblies, and assemblies are typically 100 fuel rods that are 18 pounds each and 12 feet long. Like the Fukushima reactors. I have 800 assemblies into the reactor core. I gotta watch it sometimes because you get lulled into saying the same thing, and it's not that you're lulled into it, it's just you got these stories that you always gotta try to, and sometimes you get lost in translation, I suppose. 36 years ago, the plant exploded, released radioactive material 400 times more powerful than Hiroshima, which means that the Soviets' 50 megaton bomb was equal to 9.5 times Chernobyl's radiation. Chernobyl's still emitting radiation. A bunch of countries got together and spent over $3 billion to build a nuclear cover for it. $3 billion to build a cover. Most of the money goes to administration, see? That's why you have a couple of hundred down there today, is to suck up the money being thrown at it. The whole story is insane, every facet of it. 1998, when a Ukrainian zoologist released 30 endangered horses into the nuclear wasteland to eat the radioactive foliage to reduce the wildfire risk. So why would you release endangered horses into a nuclear wasteland? That's not a researcher, that's an idiot. That's an actual idiot. Really? Do you think that's a good idea? Well, they're endangered horses. We should put them in Chernobyl where all the radiation is towed. That's a great idea. God help us if they have children. Into the radioactive zone. That's the abandoned city. That city was built for employees only, basically. And their families is what I mean by that, right? For the nuclear power plant, for the carbon-free nuclear power plant, you had to have a city of people, and then call that carbon-free. You tell me that don't look like hell in Calicut? You're full of it. You're insane if you don't think that looks like hell in Calicut. It bites you quicker, probably, but it's still, well, Helen would, right? A number of wild boars there continue to be contaminated with radioactivity. Well, you know, the boars in the United Kingdom and Ireland and Scotland, where they closed 9,000 farms, all of those animals are radioactive too, by the way. After 9,400 farms. After the nuclear reactor exploded, released radioactive substances, which is a neat way of not saying what was released into the atmosphere. Traveled across Europe in a noxic cloud. First it went to Sweden, had a cup of tea, then to Austria and Bavaria. Yeah, these are madness. I showed you the model. It covers, half the planet or something. Certainly covered Canada and the United States. So they said that the Bavarian, in particular, their country, the hunting association said every boar is checked, even if a hunter, I give game to a friend as a gift, I have to have it checked beforehand for radiation. So you no longer have a country when you got to do stuff like that. Bigger than Fukushima, Russia award to leave lasting impact on liquid natural gas. So Fukushima, Japan preferred to use liquid natural gas because it refuses to try to develop any sustainable, renewable tidal zone, like tide energy. Japan is perfect for tide energy, for goodness sakes. They can solve it in a heart problem, but they won't. They only want to go. They can't get the money. The money is always directed back to the nuclear power plants that they're trying to get up and running. It's consuming everybody and everything on the planet now. Bigger than Fukushima, is it? Western nations' rapid withdrawal from Russia's vast energy sector in the 6 weeks. This was organized. This was all United Nations and NATO countries, which are also bringing weapons into Ukraine, of course. And this, what I'd say. United Nations got to go, man, because they just do whatever they feel like now. They couldn't care less about the countries. They got access to everything. They control the government, the monetary, the medias, and the universities. They just, on a whim, they'll just do something stupid and wreck the planet. They couldn't care less. They're completely out of control. Generation after generation of inbreeding, and now our entire future is at stake of all species. And we're seeing this over and over and over, used as a catalyst now for nuclear in countries, starting to really show up all the time. And so now what that caused was the price of fuel in all countries now have skyrocketed, because a group of the New World Order and a group of people have decided this is a perfect way to squeeze the population of Earth even more to stop any kind of progress. That's their agenda. That's this generation, next generation probably, and another one's agenda is to do what they're doing. Like, this is not an individual thing. They have an agenda that was probably set many decades ago, and they're just following through on things. Like, if you look at Vladimir Putin, both of his parents worked for Stalin from the Soviet Union. You remember the debts from Stalin, I don't know what it was, 19 million or something. And bloody, incredible poverty because of the wars, right? Most of the poverty for the last 150 years was because of the war machines. Everything that was promising ended up war breaking out, it being destroyed permanently. And then you see little glimmers of humanity show up in other parts of the world. Military will show up and destroy it in increments over 2 or 3 or 5 or 10 years. Or like Afghanistan, where Russia was there for 10 years. America ran in then for 10 more years to make sure there was no way for... Well, I mean, what they done after the war in Afghanistan and Iraq was they made it illegal for the native population of the country to plant their indigenous plants. Try wrapping your mind around that. And the only plants they were allowed to plant was Monsanto. And I know that sounds fantastical, but that's who won the war in Iraq and Afghanistan. Look up who won the war in Afghanistan and Iraq. I think that's the article, and it was Monsanto. It was from major media, actually. So, Western nations' rapid withdrawal from Russia's vast energy sector deepened an energy crunch across the northern hemisphere and pushed prices for fossil fuel exports to multi-year highs. And of course, the torture of Iran has the same attributes. So there's a lot of different facets to make it work. It's a military thing. Efforts, well, they're not, I don't know why we call them militaries. These are cowards. How many suicide bombers does it take to equal an Abrams tank? How many suicide bombers does it take to equal an aircraft carrier? Efforts are also accelerating in Australia and around the world to cut the consumption of gas and other fossil fuels to reduce planet heating greenhouse gas emissions. The biggest consumer is the military and the nuclear industry of this stuff. and avert catastrophic global warming. But you can't avert catastrophic global warming because it's radiation emissions. Mostly, the majority of them, I'm assuming, is from the fuel pools of 1,000 plus fuel pools worldwide are all hemorrhaging radiation into the environment 24/7. It's complicated, but it's not. Report by the International Energy Agency, which is International Energy Agency, warned investors must avoid funding any new oil and gas fields for the world achieved a Paris Accord agreement. And like France is one of the ruling empires, it appears, on this planet, isn't it? And they're ruthless. I mean, look what they've done to Niger and to the French Polynesians. They actually radiated everybody in the French Polynesian islands. It's a terrible thing to have done to you. You have your genetics destroyed like that. Goal of limiting temperature rises 1.5 degrees. The Pacific heated up like 7 degrees since Fukushima. And the glaciers melted in the Rocky Mountains, the Cascades. We documented that over 6 years or so. And they won't even acknowledge it. They're actually gone. The only thing you got left out there is snowpack in the wintertime that lasts most of the summer. It's catastrophic. United Nations Secretary General. It's so evil to be so greedy that you destroy all species and humanity so you can be rich. And there's no one to hold you accountable. That's where your butler should just pick up a gun and put a bullet in his head. Goal of limiting temperature rises to 1.5 degrees. So United Nations is 195 militaries. They even describe themselves in the Secretary General, a general in the military. And he's a degenerate scumbag. I covered him quite a bit 2 years ago. Describes the world's addiction to fossil fuels. As if he flies all around the world in big jets, first off. United Nations is a military-industrial complex. France wants them to be the global government, right? We covered that last night. They need to go. They are an abomination. They don't have sovereignty over any country, and so they've taken over the countries through the back door. It's completely illegal what they've been doing. It's a gang of 195 countries, militaries, that are superseding the sovereignties of the countries. It's the worst possible scenario. Right? There's no incentive for something like that not to be evil, so now they become extraordinarily evil. Describes the world's addiction to fossil fuels, mutually assured destruction. You don't need them to solve the problems. They are the problems, see? And it can't continue. We just can't sit there and let this idiot machine run loose again. Russia invasion should encourage Indonesia to rethink its nuclear plan. So this was Greenpeace protesting in Jakarta. Post ran this story in Indonesia. A man walks past a demonstration by Environmental Action Group Greenpeace about the 1986 Chernobyl nuclear plant disaster outside Indonesia Ministry of Energy Mineral Resources, April 26, 2010, year before Fukushima, marking the 23rd anniversary of the world's worst nuclear accident. And back then it was, right? But Fukushima happened. So the poll tonight, you got a poll, give me a poll, give me a poll. The poll tonight is, Is Chernobyl really the world's worst nuclear accident? We got almost an amazing 40 votes with 24 people watching the show. And 100% no. 100% no. That's pretty awesome. Thank you. So I'm sensitive. I was going to do a video on it tonight, but I didn't get it done. And denounces Indonesia's plan to use nuclear energy. The Chernobyl nuclear disaster occurred in the early hours of April 26, when a reactor exploded, contaminating the then Soviet state of Ukraine. Ukraine. You know, the biggest producer of wheat? Ukraine. Contaminating the then Soviet state of Ukraine and Russia and Belarus, which is full of, was contaminated. We've got many, many studies to back up those assertions, which also spread to other parts of Europe. Spread, I mean, that's being polite. So remember, the food price hike poses risk to the developing world. So people are being poisoned. This is how evil the nuclear industry is. And we've covered it where they had the farmers convinced in Ukraine and Belarus that if you added potassium to the fields, then the plants wouldn't suck up the radiation. It's actually simply evil. And Robert Gale was one of those academics. He does limb transplants. And he also does lectures. His lectures equate radiation with 15 minutes in a kayak, or driving 600 miles in a car, or eating peanut butter. He's the same guy that might give you a transplant one of these days. Very, very low success rate, I noticed with that. I wonder why. The Chernobyl nuclear disaster occurred in the early hours when a reactor went pop. As Fukushima fades into the past, not on my watch, Indonesia, Southeast Asia's largest economy, wishes to forge ahead with nuclear energy. The Russians' invasion of Ukraine highlights how nuclear sites are an attractive and easy target for an enemy or an invader. That's fact, actually. And over the past month, Russian troops have attacked and took charge of a number of nuclear power plants in Ukraine. So I believe the Russian invasion should be an additional factor for Indonesia to think its nuclear energy projects. Indonesia isn't likely to go to war with anyone anytime soon. However, some parts of the archipelagos could be embroiled in an Asian-Pacific conflict if, for instance, China emulates Russia's imperialism and pushes to conquer Taiwan. This would bring China into direct conflict with the United States and Australia. Does anybody really think that China is scared of Australia? Is anybody out there scared of Australia? China would brush Australia off like a fly. Bless the Australian people. But the nuclear industry is taking over the country. Also, right now in Europe, the specter of a new Chernobyl is rapidly emerging as Russia targets Ukraine's various nuclear plants. Come on, man, that's not true. Russia's not targeting, because the average person hears that, they think Russia's trying to blow up nuclear power plants. Well, not might think, but that's what they're thinking. I hear it all the time. Ukraine's Chernobyl was decided the world's worst nuclear disaster. No, that's absurd. We got a poll tonight to prove that. Watch this. Hello, everybody. I hope everybody's doing good. Is Chernobyl really the world's worst nuclear accident? We got 100% of the poll says No, there's not. More than 350,000 people were evacuated during the disaster. It was actually 500,000 in Japan, 480,000. Managing it has cost, and see, they just lie and lie and lie. And it cost around $235 billion, Chernobyl. They stole that. Where would they spend $235 billion? Right? Academics are just stealing the money from there, that's all. We've seen just so many atrocious thievery from professors and academics. It's just, according to Greenpeace, which needs to disappear too, it's captured, right? It's like your media has been captured. A full military assault by Russia on Ukraine's nuclear reactors could produce a catastrophe even greater than Chernobyl. Chernobyl was a single reactor. It was 2 years old, brand new. It didn't have decades of reactor cores at the top. So yeah, it's 100% true that it'll be a bigger catastrophe than Chernobyl. Chernobyl was brutal though. It was brutal for what it done to humans and animals and insects and countries. And Greenpeace is an abomination. Greenpeace really should be. How do we get rid of Greenpeace? Rendering large swaths of Europe uninhabitable for decades, which is what Fukushima done, except it's for thousands of years. Many might believe Russia's army won't be so reckless as to fire missiles directly at Ukraine's nuclear plants, but I'm not so sure. And that the Russian army might very well shrug off the risk of widespread radiological pollutions if it thought firing up on a nuclear plant would give us some strategic or territorial gain. I doubt it, but you can't rule it out. The industry is insane, right? Now you're talking about crazies, so basically can't rule that one out. Younger Russians, too, seem only aware of Chernobyl via the popular American propaganda TV series Chernobyl. That was a propaganda, but it worked because Chernobyl was basically forgotten. Most people didn't even know what Chernobyl was that I used to talk to. Like, what? Chernobyl? No. Hear that all the time. So the media is really good at slowly weaning you away from and things like that. It's fine art has been going on. It's called social engineering, and it's full blown at this stage. You know, TV was so powerful when it was first created that they had legislation, it probably still exists, no doubt, that said if you have 4 hours of the right political party narrative on TV, you gotta have 4 hours of the left, because you can brainwash people pretty quick. Back in them days, because TV was so new, right? And then they would start repeating everything they heard. This was like magic, and it still is, unfortunately. It's a whole different, but like the social engineering facets of it is throughout Hollywood. All your universities will do it to reinforce it. It's very subtle, but it's very in your face if you're looking for it. And you'll see like Spider-Man and the Hulk, for instance, which was created by the nuclear industry, right? To lull people into complacency about nuclear waste. That's what that was all about. And now it's everywhere. The big blockbusters are mostly Spider-Man, but the Hulk's still going strong. In Indonesia, nuclear plants might then be used against itself, either as radiological bomb targets or as sites of terror to manipulate the Indonesian government. Which is true. And even if Indonesia does avoid a war with other nations over the long lifetime of a nuclear plant will still be vulnerable to terrorist attacks for thousands of years. A foreign or homegrown terrorist would not need to launch a missile at an Indonesian nuclear power plant to create a nuclear disaster. They could steal a civilian aircraft and crash it into it with high speed. All you got to do is cut off external power going into the plant. Well, a little more complicated than that, I suppose, because they got generators, but most generators only got 8 hours of fuel. If you can keep the plant under your control for a few hours, you never know. Russia is also a leading candidate to be Indonesian nuclear supply state, and supplying the nuclear fuel for those plants, providing technical safety advice. Well, the main criteria to build a nuclear plant is you need a farmland, lots of active farms, and put it right smack in the middle so that the food is always radioactive, or you can start killing the population. Given the way Russia's entangled, manipulated Ukraine through threats against nuclear safety, Indonesia might be exposing itself to a similar pattern of abuse in any dealings with Russia. You don't need it, right? Last year in 2021, it was 291 gigawatts of renewables came online. That's the equivalent, just, like a 1 gigawatt nuke plant is a big plant. But so that's 291 nuke plants, say, in 12 months. You can't do that with nuclear. And you gotta have all these security guards, and the list is just stupid. It's such a stupid industry, and now it's killing everything on us. In a nuclear-tainted land, Ukraine is facing extreme version of such problems with an aggressive Russia as it fights for independence in a nuclear wasteland, right? And Ukraine is one of the world's biggest exporter of radioactive wheat, along with Russia. And the writer is a lecturer in environmental social sciences and faculty of social science and humanities in Jakarta University. It has all been captured by the nuclear industry. Inside the complicated paradox of building cement seawalls. So they come up with a new technique they want to use for seawalls, because Japan uses a lot of cement. Breakwater is cement breakwater. So it's not like a wall, it's a breakwater. It's not watertight, right? Consequences of global warming. Designed to protect people from the consequences of global warming. They can't help themselves but be evil, can they? Also contribute to crazies. Tsunami towered over 120 feet tall, 40 meters, and dismantled coastal flood defenses in 2011. The Japanese authorities, wanting to better protect communities, stop growing food in the nuclear wasteland, stop selling it worldwide and in your own country first. Japan's authorities don't want to protect the communities. That's absurd. Suggest that they're good people. The cement walls span 400 kilometers of the coastline at 15 meters high, 45 feet high in places. Some of them are up to 70 feet high. Now line the coast to resist the incoming waves and allow enough time for the the victims to evacuate in the event of another tsunami. They were recently tested by a 7.4 magnitude earthquake which struck off the coast of Fukushima Prefecture March the 16th, 2022. So why bring that up unless there was a major event, see? You know what I mean? Why say that unless there's a major event? The seawalls will also serve as a defensive front line against effective climate change. A recent report by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, IPCC, which is United Nations. Why is United Nations the only people out there that the world is allowed to listen to? How the hell do we ever get into this trap? Paradoxically, these walls are designed to protect people from the consequences of global heating. Now, the global heating, we never really started hearing that until United Nations COP26, a 13-day fiasco. Last year, we done 13 shows on it. Every single day we done a live show on it, which was brutal, by the way, for 13 days straight. I was actually like giddy at the end of 13 days. I had to take 4 days off, I think. So they got these walls for 400 miles of the coastline. Just don't live down so freaking close to the water. By replacing cement with recycled industrial waste, such as granulated slag from steelworks and pulverized ash from coal power plants, essentially residue that can be scraped out of the bottom of the furnaces. So that ultimately gets washed into the ocean, right? In increments over time. The newly designed low-carbon concrete mix is not really a concrete mix, it's a cement mixture. And this is not recyclable materials. This is not... Because you can recycle anything, or you can use anything and call it being recycled. Let's just put all kinds of toxic waste out there too while we're at it. Chernobyl ex-chief engineer condemns the cowardly IAEA, Rafael Grossi, over Russia's nuclear aggression, because the IAEA hasn't officially come out and denounced it. It's like Greenpeace has never come out and officially denounced or Arnie Gunnarsson. They never come out and denounce.
Now, the division I ran built nuclear fuel racks for boiling water reactors exactly like Fukushima.
Yeah, so that raises the question. If you've built fuel racks for the boiling water reactors exactly like Fukushima, how is it that he doesn't know that that's a fake fuel pool over there and the real one was destroyed? But Greenpeace, right, should have stood on that alone. They could have destroyed the nuclear industry right there. You still can, see? So Greenpeace should be just destroyed. It's such a disgusting creature, Arnie Gunnarsson. Nikolai Steinberg accuses the United Nations nuclear watchdog of having their tails between their legs. This is true, we can't argue about that. When the world was on the brink of a nuclear catastrophe. I mean, that's true, so. A former chief engineer at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant has condemned the cowardly International Atomic Energy Agency, aka United Nations, Rafael Grossi, for its refusal to criticize Russia's aggression against Ukraine's nuclear sites. Mr. Steinberg, 75, came to Chernobyl as the chief engineer in May 1986, a month after Chernobyl blew up. The worst nuclear disaster in history, which we got a poll tonight. Is Chernobyl the world's worst nuclear disaster in history? I never charged up the battery in my Geiger counter, so I see that died on us. I apologize. Where's the poll to? Hello, everybody. Is Chernobyl really the world's worst nuclear accident? I got 44 votes, 100% saying no. Dana, it's absurd to say that Chernobyl is the world's worst nuclear accident. Dog. Chernobyl was brutal, though. It's brutal. Over 3 million children with disabilities, with illnesses. Many will die prematurely, according to Kofi Annan in 2002 at the United Nations podium. But we got the studies. It was devastating all across Norway, Denmark, Switzerland, even Canada, the United States was hammered. The worst nuclear disaster in history. But how many times do we see that? See? He worked decontaminating the plant before the chairman of the All-Union Committee. So, the only reason people stick that in there because they're in the industry. You have to put those words in there. If you write a story about Chernobyl, you got to put that in to show that you're a friend of the nuclear industry, right? It's like a secret handshake. You got to put stuff like that in your article so they know you're a friend. He worked decontaminating the plant before becoming the vice chairman of the All-Union Committee for Nuclear Safety in Moscow. Yeah. And later served as Ukraine's deputy energy minister. So he's wearing a lot of hats. He was also one of the group of experts who wrote a 1992 report exposing design flaws in the Chernobyl reactor that contributed to the explosion. And the industry is constantly saying it was by human error, had nothing to do with the design, right? The Soviet authorities had originally blamed the disaster on the errors of the plant staff, but he wrote a report exposing design flaws in the reactors was the reason they had to do the things they were doing in the first place, apparently. Mr. Steinberg had written an open letter urging Rafael Grossi, the Domani Director General to the International Atomic Energy Agency, also known to most people as United Nations, to take measures will make it possible to save and improve the nuclear safety regime and save the world from nuclear catastrophe. He's really upset. He's legitimately, sincerely upset. On the first day of the invasion, Russia's troops captured the decommissioned Chernobyl power plant, an exclusion zone, where, it's not like it was very hard, where radioactive waste is still stored and where a $3 billion sarcophagus containment structure prevents radiation escaping from the destroyed Fort reactor. Well, that's not true. You can't let this build up inside the containment structure. It's all vented. It's a controlled venting, right? That doesn't mean that is safe, of course. If you let, because the reactor is still melting down, if you let the gases build up, it eventually displaces the oxygen, and when you open up a door, introduce oxygen in there, it'll detonate. Not only that, even if that doesn't happen, when you put a sarcophagus over a nuclear meltdown, the sarcophagus becomes extraordinarily radioactive. That's a no-go zone inside the sarcophagus. And it gets worse every year. The entire sarcophagus eventually starts emitting huge pulses of energy. Because the structure becomes embrittled. It becomes neutron bombarded. There's a lot to it, but I think that pretty well tells the story. Russia troops also captured the Zapor nuclear power plant in the south of Ukraine during a battle. It wasn't a battle. They had people were holding hands singing Kumbaya to try to stop the tanks. Right? There was no firefight per se. Because then you got to target who's ever shooting at you. In which a missile destroyed a training building far away from the reactors. That, again, it wouldn't surprise me if the Ukraine done that in order to invoke the fear around the planet in the hopes of stopping, because that's what the normal country does. It's called a false flag. And in a scenario like that, it's you allege that a missile blows up, but you don't say exactly where, because that's what the media ran with it, right? They ran with it. It was vicious for about 48 hours. Mr. Steinberg told the International Atomic Energy Agency is part of the United Nations and therefore has the authority to intervene. No, they don't. They don't got the authority. United Nations can arrest you and put you in jail in the actions of countries where they can harm nuclear safety or lead to controlled use of nuclear material. They don't got no authority. All they can do is recommend. They don't have any sovereignty over any country. They're an illegal entity on top of that. So they don't have sovereignty that can compel a country, right, to do whatever they bark. In order to intervene appropriately, the International Atomic Energy Agency must receive a mandate from the UN Security Council. And UN Security Council is 195 countries. They don't go to war. Well, they can. They went to war against North Korea. The United Nations did. I shouldn't say they can't, because that's not accurate. Well, we'll talk about actually North Korea coming up. From the beginning of the Russians' aggression against Ukraine until today, the Director General, he's not a Director General, he's Rafael Grossi, he's a piece of shit inbreed from the nuclear industry, has not appealed to the UN Security Council, has not formally condemned the aggression, and has not demanded an immediate cessation of hostilities. Because the United Nations did at one point, didn't they? I seen that. There's a little demon right there himself. The demonic scumbag himself right there. Rafael Grossi. Protecting nuclear power plants from the impact of modern weapons is impossible in principle. However, the Director General, also known as Scumbag Rafael Grossi, continues to broadcast to the whole world that Ukraine nuclear power plants are safely operated and that nothing and no one is in danger. So stop looking at me. Who can prevent a pilot to drop a bomb on an element of the country's energy system which caused the collapse of the system and a possible repetition of Fukushima? Nobody. Well said. Well said. That's the control room at Chernobyl, I think. What kind of a safety culture can we talk about when, with their tails between their legs, the leaders of the world of community are afraid to say aloud the names of the criminals, including professionals, who have taken the world hostage? And the IAEA, which has taken the world hostage, did not respond to a request for a comment. Why not? Usually always got something to say. However, Mr. Grossi had said in a statement last week that The IAEA has been actively working to ensure the safety and security of all nuclear installations in Ukraine. You'd be stupid to believe anything they tell you. I remain gravely concerned about the safety and security of nuclear facilities in Ukraine. I personally expressed my readiness to immediately come to Ukraine to conclude an agreement which would include substantial assistance and support measures, including on-site presence of the International Atomic Energy experts at a different facility in Ukraine, as well as the delivery of vital safety equipment. And the assistance is essential to help avert the real risk of a severe nuclear accident that could threaten the public's health. Really, like Fukushima, like you helped at Fukushima avoid a public threat, did you, IAEA? You twisted, sick, and demented, sadistic scum. You are just scumbags. The world needs to be done with you friggers. I remain gravely concerned about the safety, says the lion sack of doo-doo. The future of energy will require bigger sacrifices from the citizens. When they call you a citizen, you know you're talking to an incredible, pompous piece of art. Supply chain brain. One form, one focus, many minds. Sounds like another lobbying group, don't it? The need for more energy, which is true though, some of this. It's not that they thought it up, we've talked about it before. The need for more energy conservation has snowballed. The war in Ukraine is forcing Europe to curb dependence on Russian energy. It's not forcing them. In fact, they're not even doing it. Europe is still taking gas. Extreme weather events, which is caused by the radioactive fallout from the multiple nuclear meltdowns in Japan. So what you're seeing is a death plume. The model is 16 days. It's from France, where radiation is covering the entire planet. The model stops at 16 days, but the radioactive plume won't disappear for millions of years. This is a death plume. But it also has another weird attribute where every second is pulsing energy at the speed of light. Can you make something that can pulse energy at the speed of light? And what's the repercussions for something that pulses at the speed of light? What kind of energy are we talking about to have something pulsing at the speed of light? And it'll do that every second for who knows how long, right? That's global warming. It's been going on for 76 years. That one in particular is a 16-day model. The radiation is still hemorrhaging out of these places, both in the ocean and in the atmosphere. Means leaders will be increasingly turning ordinary citizens to make sacrifices beyond paying exorbitant prices at the gas pumps. Exorbitant prices at the gas pumps. Which was a choice. You didn't have to do that. You didn't have to say no to Russia's oil, because we only have a finite amount of places we can get the oil. Saying no to Russia hurts everybody. Oh. Japan's efforts last week to avoid a catastrophic blackout is the latest example of what people everywhere may soon face. Everywhere. Because she said no to Russia. And everybody's supposed to bake cookies for Ukraine. It's total brainwashing when we've seen that, the way that played out. All the school children had to dump out their piggy banks for Ukraine. It had all the stink of World War II, where they wanted everybody's gold, everybody's silver, they wanted everybody's gasoline, everybody's tires from their vehicles. Everybody had to work for the military-industrial complex to because they picked a war where they couldn't win, and all these countries were sucked in to the endless misery machine ever since. Energy has been in short supply around the world following Russia's invasion. Russia invaded Syria. We didn't have energy shortage worldwide. It invaded Afghanistan. We didn't have energy shortages worldwide. It was 100%. You ever heard the expression, never waste a crisis? Well, they took it to hell, didn't they? The situation in Japan was suddenly made worse on Tuesday after an earthquake a week earlier shut key power plants, but didn't destroy the fragile nuclear meltdowns were at ground zero itself. Cutting demands across Europe in parallel fashion to the way the Japanese have cut power use would help reduce demand for Russian oil and gas, which powered so much of Western Europe. Japan's call to action mirrors similar efforts during the oil crisis in the 1970s, when producers in the Middle East stopped exporting crude to the United States and its allies for supporting Israel during Yom Kippur War. And US President Richard Nixon urged citizens to turn down their thermostats and set speed limits of 55 miles an hour to cut the demand for oil. These are good practices we should have just kept doing anyway, right? No U.S. president after Carter had attempted to invoke such a spirit of sacrifice from the country's victims. Even Joe Biden has so far only urged for more supply from domestically and from large Middle Eastern producers. And some politicians in Europe have started to suggest that citizens will have to do their part to reduce the energy consumption. Not the military, not the aircraft that consume, not the government, but the citizens will have to do their parts to reduce the energy consumption, cut gas imports. You got rid of the military, you wouldn't have a crisis. If you don't want to act on going 1 degree lower, which is why not, do it against Putin. Do it against Putin. The degenerate International Energy Agency is encouraging a temporary thermostat reduction of 1 degree Celsius. Should they always keep it down 1 degree? The rich won't, but the poor will. Despite the International Energy Agency's call, around the world, for most part, has been cutting fuel taxes or doling out subsidies. Governments around the world have been cutting fuel taxes or doling out subsidies, which has propped up consumption. So basically saying the idea of the prices being driven up was to stop people from driving, keep them home. Drive the prices up so they can't go anywhere, only to get the basics, and then they have enough gas to make it back home. This is 100% social engineering is what we're talking about. It's 100% social engineering. It's outrageous, too, on top of that. I mean, yeah, there's nothing wrong with cutting back on your lights, turning off lights you don't need, blah, blah, blah. That should be common sense. But the rich won't do it. They'll just leave everything on. Can't stand turning a light on. They got to leave it on. Measures like slashing taxes dampens the price sensitivity by consumers and limits the incentive to conserve, says, I can't say the word, but Jane Nakano, a senior scumbag at the Center for Strategic International Studies in Washington. If they're out of Washington, D.C., they're basically a military think tank. The European desire to reduce reliance on nuclear energy ought to come with greater efforts to conserve energy and electricity. I mean, it's just good practice anyway. You know, the government's not going to do it, right? They're just greedy, despicable inbreeds. Nuclear industry is not going to do it. They're disgusting inbreeds. Conserving electricity in Japan is known as set sudden. The word became a rallying cry in the decade following Fukushima, the atomic disaster. The word triple meltdowns. 4 buildings confirmed, but it looks like the common spent fuel pool around £10 million, or double that even, is missing. And Reactor 6 has dubious footage has come out last year suggesting that was melted down. But at least 1, 2, 3, and 4 reactor and the fuel pools are 100% gone. Shut the nation's 54 nuclear reactors. To keep the lights on, the government asked everyone to save as much power as possible, and it worked. Framing the energy crunch to the public is key. Framing the energy crunch, all you got to do is ask people. You don't have to frame it, trick them, deceive, manipulate them. All you got to do is ask them. Say, listen, at an event, we're going to have blackouts for millions of people. Everybody's got to cut back on the power. Here, call this 1-800-RAT line if any big companies are not doing their thing, or government offices. The Pentagon's $773 billion budget focuses on nuclear. You can't use them. Even if there is a war, you can't use them. You can pretend you're going to, but there's no win. What's the point of that? So that money is basically to be stolen by the nuclear industry, almost $1 trillion. Nuclear wars shouldn't be up to any one person, really. And Joe Biden shouldn't have a button that can send nuclear weapons at somebody, right? Access to it. Because the Americans, the president can actually go ahead and launch the nuclear weapons. They can have an aneurysm and say, launch the nuclear weapons! And you got no choice but to launch them. Congress and the President Biden now have a narrow window to restrict the ability of future president to launch a nuclear weapon. John B. is a member of the Science Security Board, the bulletin of the atomic scumbag scientists, and a former advisor to President Obama and Vice President at that time, Joe Biden. President Joe Biden is sought to avoid having the United States or NATO dragged directly into a war in Ukraine for fear that the situation could quickly escalate to a nuclear war with Moscow. Well, they are in the war because they're supplying the weapons to Ukraine. The fear is based on experience, but also one simple reality. All American presidents since 1945 have had the unfettered authority to launch nuclear weapons at any time. Now, that's reassuring. 4,000 warhead-strong nuclear arsenal in America, capable of global destruction in minutes. The World Nuclear News. This is a lobbying group that is disguised as a media. They're openly a lobbied group, they're a nuclear lobby group, and they're despicable. They're so terrifying that they won't even put their names on the articles, you notice? Poland's president hails nuclear partnership with the US of A. Poland, which is NATO. They're a NATO country, aren't they? And America and some companies in America apparently are going to help them build a nuclear. And so it takes them 15 years to build their nuclear power plant. they can build the same amount of capacity each year with the same amount of money for 15 years with renewables. But that's what we say with the nuclear death cult. That's the point of it. It doesn't want humanity to survive. That's what nuclear's agenda really is. They don't want to get caught at it, so they're doing it in increments over time. He said the country was also grateful for the unceasing engagement in the program of peaceful energy involving the construction of American nuclear power plants in Poland. America can't even build their own nuclear power plants. Vote for climate protection reasons and energy security. And that energy security, we're really seeing that a lot in the last week, those words. This is obviously, there's an agenda. Do they use those to frame it that way? Kenya selected 2 sites for nuclear power productions. Kenya, who can't even manage their garbage, let alone water, how are they going to manage nuclear? After years of pre-feasibility studies, the Degenerate Nuclear Power and Energy Agency, NUPI, has picked Kilifi, a coastal Kenyan town, and Kwale, located southwest of Mombasa, is best suited for Kenya's first nuclear power generator due to the region's abundance of water. And most likely farmland in that case, right? The 2021 Energy Petroleum Statistics Report released in February showed 92.3% of energy in Kenya was generated from renewable sources in 2020. 92.3% of energy was from renewables in 2020. Geothermal, hydro, and wind power accounted for 43%, 36%, and 11% of electricity, respectively. What are you doing with nuclear? You finally got something that worked, and you're going to go put the country in a hole and poison the country, put it in prime land surrounded by farms where you poison everybody. Right? It's despicable. It really is. That's just despicable they done that. The nuclear industry has wiggled its way in there. It's unbelievably despicable. Revolting, I tell you. Only 6.5% of the total electricity in 2020 was generated from thermal sources. That's stunning, actually. The push for United Kingdom nuclear plant lacks facilities for toxic waste, says expert. Another one of the scumbags that we cover all the time. Look how carbon-free this place is. That's amazing. All the best metal on the planet, the most expensive metal and electricity and cement and steel available is gobbled up to use for that. Everything is going to be radiated in the end, never be reused again. Well, the industry will use it again. These cranes are brutally expensive. Like, they got the best of the best of the best materials. They're hugely expensive and dangerous legacy of the United Kingdom's 20th century nuclear revolution accounts for 700,000 cubic meters of toxic waste. 700,000 one-ton pickup trucks of nuclear waste. Much of it stored in cellar fields in Cumbria. Remember that name, Cumbria? Which is huge cancer clusters there for children and that. And they blamed it on the flu. They got the cancer clusters because of flu, Dana. studies, right? In Sellafield, which had a nuclear mixed oxide fuel reactor meltdown in the 50s, they had it for 50 years. They had to get rid of all the milk and farm products for hundreds of miles. And nobody caught on, so they just said, frig it, let's just poison everybody. But the Office for Nuclear Regulation says one of the most complex and hazardous nuclear sites in the world. An assessment by the Nuclear Decommissioning Authority, which has never decommissioned a single reactor in Britain, by the way, says spent fuel from new nuclear reactors will be of such high temperatures it'll need to stay on site for 140 years. For 140 years before it can be removed to a geological deep repository. If one is ever built in the United Kingdom, that's if they actually build one. It'll have to sit there for 140 years. Now, Claire Corkhill, who I absolutely despise, who's incredibly despicable. We've covered her many times over the years. A horrific scumbag for the nuclear industry. A degenerate human trash for the scumbag industry. Is, of course, a professor of nuclear material degradation of the University of Sheffield and a member of the Committee on Radioactive Waste Management, an independent body that advises the government. A perpetual lawyer is the independent body that advises the government. A perpetual lawyer. The nuclear industry is just despicable no matter how many ways you look at it. All you get is gross. That's gross. That's disgusting. The people really are in the industry. They really are disgusting. The cost, I don't know why they don't get a real job. It's because they don't have a personality. They don't even have the qualifications of a human. The cost of decommissioning and disposing of the radioactive waste from nuclear power stations built in the 50s, 70s, and 90s has risen to $131 billion. Well, this is not all the waste they're talking about, because for 20 years they took it out on ships and dumped it in the Atlantic. In shallow water on top of that. Well, a couple of 100 feet. And the drums will compress and explode when they get to the bottom. Because it's 14.7 pounds per square inch per 33 feet, right? This is likely, per atmosphere, this is likely to rise further as the cost of building a deep geological disposal site rises up to 53 billion euros, which is 670 billion US dollars, just to build a facility. They're saying 70 billion US dollars. Industry is just disgusting. And now attempts to build an underground dump for nuclear waste have so far failed. 9 years ago, attempt to site one in Cumbria was rejected. So, go somewhere else, right? No. Now they got 3 sites in Cumbria they want to use. A new attempt to find a site is in the early stages. They have 3 more sites in Cumbria, right alongside of Sellafield, multiple, which was they had a nuclear meltdown, still 8 million liters a day hemorrhaging into the Atlantic from it. Of radioactive water they're pouring over the meltdown dirt. They have pools outdoors, that they don't even know what's in the pools of fuel. It's completely out of control. 9 years ago, an attempt to site one in Cumbria was rejected, so now they got 3 sites there. If it goes ahead, it could be years before building starts. And the And a deep geological repository would only be available to receive waste after late 2040, so 2050. So 30 years, if they start right now, it can start taking waste. They don't want to put the waste down because the waste is still splitting the atoms. The atoms are released into the environment all day, every day. And who knows the real number, but a lot of evidence suggests you're talking about 1 trillion atoms per liter. And each pool boils off about 120,000 liters a day, and there's over 1,000 pools like that worldwide, saturating the environment with radiation. So no species can survive in the future. It's such an evil thing. The amount of legacy waste is not small in terms of nuclear waste, says Cork Hill. We are looking at an underground footprint of 20 kilometers at a depth of up to 1,000 meters and $70 billion US. The power station needs decommissionings include all their submarines, all their nuclear power plants. The Decommission Authority has never done anything. It has no authority. 11 Magnux power stations, reactors, between the 50s and 70s, including Dungeness A, Hinkley Point. These are all, by the way, surrounded by farms. It's humiliating. These people even were able to survive all these years. Their parents should be arrested for not killing them when they were born. It is likely to take until 2150. The year 2150. I'll be 190 years old. If they get everything up and running right away. And meanwhile, it's all hemorrhaging into the environment to make sure no species can survive for the future. As if one is built, of course. Only then would the deep geological repository be able to take waste from a new nuclear reactor. Ocean dumping of nuclear waste. This was 2018. Before 1993, there was no international laws preventing countries from dumping nuclear waste in the ocean. And in the period from 1946 to 1993, 13 countries, including the United States and United Kingdom, used ocean dumping to dispose of their nuclear waste. And this is just a fraction of the distribution sites. And I apologize for not having them in the same picture. I'll try to rectify that and get that up as my regular go-to. Like if they're dumping stuff over the boats, and they were for 2 decades straight, United Kingdom in particular, many other countries too, right? 13 countries were doing this. If your Geiger counter is screaming, you need to get out of there. What lies beneath the toxic legacy of post-war ammunition and dumping in the oceans? So also chemical, biological weapons that they dumped in the oceans, the same people. This one is chemical, biological weapons dumped in the ocean. And this is nuclear dumped in the ocean. So there's no incentive for them not to there's no law to hold them accountable, right? They know it, and they have no regrets. And their children are in positions of authority or professors at your local universities as they speak. It's so companies can save a few bucks each time, right? And that's part of that agenda. It's so disturbing because we've covered this so many times. Irradiated fuel, liquids, solid waste. The whole criteria is really interesting. So it was illegal to dump certain stuff. So all you done was so-called diluting it, and then it's legal. And you're not destroying it, you're not diluting it, you're spreading it around because it's nuclear. Back to that story. So 773 cubic meters for United Kingdom is a fraction. For 20 years, the heavy stuff, the heavy legacy waste was all dumped in the Atlantic Ocean, see? The people that done it are still alive. We should catch them and hang them publicly for doing it. North Korea signals is preparing for a nuclear test. Yeah, really? Hey, everybody, we're ready! North Korea takes a victory lap as evidence shows it's revamping a nuclear test site. North Korea takes a victory lap. Oh, my favorite. So South Korea and the United States are to conduct military drills to counter North Korea's nuclear aggressions. How many nuclear weapons did America test again? Now, what did United Nations do to North Korea in 1950? They burnt down every town in North Korea. We went over there and fought the war and eventually burnt down every town in North Korea. And it killed 20% of the population. That's what United Nations done. Napalming villages, women and children, collective punishment, war crimes. 65 years after the United States, it's United Nations, burnt down every town in North Korea, the U.S. military is now simultaneously bombing or rocketing 7 different non-nuclear countries. 8th Army Chemical Officer Donald Bowe was quoted as saying, on an average good day, pilots in the Korean War dropped 70,000 gallons of napalm. 45,000 from the U.S. Air Force, 10 to 20,000 by the Navy, 4 to 5,000 gallons of napalm by the Marines, who nicknamed the burning jellied gasoline's cooking oil. Perhaps 2 million Koreans, North and South, were killed in the Korean War, all in the name of opposing the rule of force. 4 million casualties, at least 2 million were civilians. After Truman fired General MacArthur, remember that, in May 1951, the former Supreme Commander testified to Congress, the war in Korea has already almost destroyed the nation of 20 million people. I have never seen such devastation. I have seen, I guess, as much blood and disaster as any living man. And I just curled my stomach. And the last time I was there, after I looked at that wreckage, those thousands of women and children, and I vomited it. There was a General MacArthur. He finally got a conscience. When he got that, they fired him right away in disgrace. It was over 10 million wounded. EDF to announce new cost increases, delays for Hinkley Point nuclear plant. And Hinkley Point, of course, is going to be built in farmland. Prime farmland, as far as you can see. They're lunatics, eh? EDF, which is France, because United Kingdom is too stupid to build their own reactor. Last updated his construction schedule in January 2021 when it said Britain's first new nuclear power plant to be built in decades. It would be delayed by another 6 months to June 2026, with the cost rising an additional £500 million to 30 billion. With a guaranteed, when he finally get it running, the people at Boars Electricity are getting a guaranteed price. It'll be 3 times anywhere else in the country for 20 years or something until it's paid for. The plant was originally expected to open in 2025, had a construction budget of 18 billion, so it went up another 12 billion so far. And you've seen the same thing with similar projects in Flamanville, in France, in China and Finland. Repeated delays and spiraling costs. And renewables we've seen last year alone was equal to 291 gigawatt nuclear power plants worth of renewables were online in 12 months and plugged into the grid. The United States is pessimistic on nuclear talk revival with Iran. Well, you got land, sea, air embargoes. Iran's just going to do it anyway. Fresh concern over staffing at Chernobyl, World Nuclear News. The World Nuclear News, these are human traitors. These are incredible, degenerate human traitors. I'm not trying to pick on the nuclear industry, but I'm trying to shit on it. I'm not trying. It's easy. It's effortless. It's just normal. You wake up and open your eyes, you talk about nuclear, you take a big crap, and you shit on it. Fresh concerns over staffing at Chernobyl. The International Atomic Energy Agency, again, this is United Nations. Why are we always talking about them? How is it they are in charge when they're not even a nation or a country, they're just a corporation? How do we get that complacent that something like that could happen? Well, we didn't. That was the nuclear industry. It's captured all the regulatories, all the medias, all the universities, all the key positions in governments, and now it's the global government. It's now gone insane, and now it's full of retards, so to speak, inbreeds of the industry, the entitled lot. Their parents were scumbags, and their parents were scumbags, and their parents were scumbags. Reports the staff who volunteered to replace the workers have been on site for 25 days, have now themselves been there for nearly a week. So you won't have that problem with coal, oil, or gas, or renewables, but deadly nuclear. Grossi, Raphael Grossi, has previously warned about the impact on safety of staff and nuclear power plants. Yeah, like he gives a shit. Facilities been used, did you know this? That Chernobyl is still used for research and development and radioisotope production for genocide in hospitals and industrial applications. I didn't know that. So you got a couple of hundred researchers there all the time. So-called researchers. It's unbelievable, eh? How degenerate these people actually are. What is the current nuclear arms pact between Russia and the United States? Well, they did have 7 agreements, 8 nuclear arms control agreement. They only have 1 now in effect. The treaty limits nuclear warheads to 1,500 a side and limits the number of launchers and delivery systems. Well, the other 7 are gone. If you do have a war, that doesn't matter. Nobody's going to be counting after that. The New START doesn't cover the thousands of battlefield and nuclear weapons. So it excludes the battlefield nuclear bombs. Yeah? If they can betray you, it'll always be spectacular. Notably, Ukraine actually had its own nuclear missiles until 1994, when the country agreed to give all of its weapons to Russia. There's a lesson. In exchange for security assurances, which leaders says were violated by the 2014 invasion of Crimea. The Miran's nuclear plant has long relied on Russia for uranium. The company won't say how much it still does. Yeah, because it's none of your business. Even though it is, it's my business. It's just the way they frame it sometimes. I just say stuff like that, whatever. Well, the war in Russia sparked a sweeping range of economic sanctions against Russia and its energy-related exports. That was done by a group of people, right, that from NATO countries and United Nations countries. Screwed every country out there. Similar barriers do not currently extend to the fuel used in nuclear power plants. Right? They won't take the oil, but we'll take the uranium. The St. Louis-based energy utility acknowledged the week that at least some of its nuclear fuel needs are still tied to Russia. Russia is one of the few places that does the major fuel fabrication. The nuclear fuel supply chain encompasses 4 main steps. The first is mining the uranium. An activity happens in many countries. But before it can be used as fuel for a nuclear reactor, uranium needs to undergo processing or conversions, followed by enrichments, and finally fuel fabrications when it is turned into usable pellets or rods. The last step is one that is performed entirely in the United States for domestic utilities, but in the middle step, conversion and enrichment are often controlled by Russia. The problem here is conversion and enrichment. It's a very constrained market, and you only have very, very limited options. La Hague is one of them, right? In France, with 500 security guards over there. For instance, he said, only 2 companies outside of Russia currently performing either step. Overall, the U.S. utilities receive about 20% of their enriched uranium from Russia. They need to be refueled every 18 to 24 months. And lawmakers in Congress, however, are pushing for a ban on Russian uranium, with legislation introduced in the U.S. Senate. Wow, they won't get reelected. If the ban is imposed, the U.S. nuclear fleet could likely ride it out. Oh, says Edwin Lyman, the director of nuclear power safety for the Union of Unconcerned Scientists. And I really despise Edwin Lyman. We've caught him out in a number of lies over the years. Well, actually, a lot of lies over the years. And he's the go-to for the public relation firms, I've noticed, too. If you're going to be a scumbag, you might as well be a popular one, I suppose. Beaten Putin with wind and nuclear power. With wind and nuclear. So the nuclear industry is doing everything now to try to insert itself into as a good guy, right? See that? That's showing, stuff like that is showing up everywhere. Dirty nuclear. Nuclear is just despicably dirty, by the way. It's a disease factory is what these things are. Don't put your coal, oil, and gas in communities. That's all you got to do. Coal, oil, and gas don't make plumes covering the planet. By invading Ukraine, the Kremlin has jolted Europe into an energy U-turn. But Russia's energy will keep flowing, at least for now. Even more significantly, European governments are embracing renewables and even returning to nuclear. And 2 reactors scheduled to be decommissioned will be kept in services for an additional 10 years. The choice will strengthen our country's independence from fossil fuel in a turbulent geopolitical environment, says the Prime Minister. Other governments are doubling down on their nuclear commitments. The Czech Republic has launched a tender for the construction of a new nuclear power plant, and lunatic Boris Johnson in Britain met industry representatives to accelerate the development of a new nuclear project. Berlin is dismantling its few remaining nuclear reactors, with the last two due to close this year. Experts say the country's nuclear reactors can still be saved, but the government seems unwilling to change its mind. They are doing everything they can to stop any reactor anywhere on the planet from shutting down. Even if the reactor is crumbling, even if it's melted down, no, it's fine. That's the nuclear industry. They gladly kill everybody on the planet to keep a reactor open. Gladly. For now, Europe will keep buying from Russia as the war in Ukraine expands. I don't see it leaving Ukraine. I hope I'm right. And if I'm wrong, then that means that's World War III. Nuclear energy revival hits Europe, but it looks like the Ukraine invasion was meant to do everything we're talking about tonight, right? Drive up the prices of commodity worldwide, a global reset on commodity prices. And we're talking stunning numbers for coal, oil, gas, stunning numbers for nickel and iron and ore, stunning, just stunning increases. And also the incredible amount of noise we're hearing now. The war in Ukraine means we need more nuclear power plants. That's the nuclear industry panicking, right? It's a very dangerous panic, though, trying to sell that message. Nuclear energy revival hits Europe as countries try to wean off Russia's gas. So, right, there was this patriotic call to ban everything Russia, donate your children's piggy banks to Ukraine so they can buy more weapons. Excuse me, am I missing anything? Europe leaders are reversing course after vowing to shut down nuclear reactors. A lot of it's not true what they're saying, by the way. Dirty, despicable nuclear. French President Emmanuel Macron, when it comes to degenerates, there's a major one, was the first to show a change of heart, saying in November that France would build new nuclear reactors at the very time when all the reactors were going offline. Just as he's ready to leave office, now he's gonna run again. So now all of a sudden he's gonna build new reactors because he's up for re-election this month. See? I pray every day that he gets picked up by a tornado and thrown about 700 feet. With nuclear threat, Putin makes the unthinkable a possibility. Well, it's not very hard to start hating the nuclear industry. If you start reading through nuclear news for a whole week, you'll end up hating nuclear. You don't need to watch my videos. You'll end up hating nuclear. Might Russia's President Vladimir Putin drop the bomb, unleash a nuclear weapon in Ukraine? Is it conceivable? It is conceivable, rather, they claim. We are worried about terrorism, climate change, the Middle East, and energy, and mass migration, all by the military-industrial complex, I might add. The peril of a nuclear apocalypse disappeared with the 1991 collapse of the Soviet Union. Right, and so the Soviet Union didn't collapse. Mikhail Gorbachev dissolved the country, the corporation known as the Soviet Union. He just dissolved it. And by doing that, of course, he got rid of everybody's pensions. He lives in a mansion, by the way. Castle, actually. With every luxury. You ever see the interview of the last anniversary? He lives in absolute luxury. He's living the life of a billionaire. And he dissolved the country, and everybody lost their pensions and their patents for the country and their legacy. The most cowardly thing you can do is dissolve a country. The peril of a nuclear apocalypse disappeared with the collapse of the Soviet Union. The specter of nuclear war. So there's a lot of this incredible, like they're still working on this Ukrainian, trying to turn that into a mass psychosis, Stockholm syndrome. Avoid nuclear war and end Putin's aggression. They kept their mouth shut for every other war, but they cherry-picked this one. So it's an agenda. That's an agenda when you see stuff like that. President Eisenhower's diary observed that a Pentagon war game concluded that a nuclear war would eviscerate the federal government. Let's have a nuclear war today, in that case. Destroy most America, and worse, 65% of the population would require some kinds of medical cure. That's acceptable if you're going to eviscerate the government. I can live with it. And in most incidences, hell, I think we should have a nuclear war if that's what it takes to get rid of the government. No opportunity whatsoever to get it, and that the damage inflicted by us against the Soviets was roughly 3 times greater. Putin's war aggression against Ukraine has brought the world to the precipice of a nuclear holocaust. They're coming out of the woodwork lately, I notice, aren't they? Putin's spokesman, Dmitry Peskov, told lunatic CNN that the use of nuclear weapons would be permissible if they felt threatened. That earlier, Putin put Russian nuclear forces on special nuclear combat readiness. We covered all of that, by the way. And that Russia's troops attacked the Ukrainian nuclear power plant, which they didn't actually do. The people were lining the streets holding hands, right? And occupied Chernobyl, there was quite a few people died in that one. But it wasn't at the site itself, it was the surrounding areas. I'm mindful of the threat of releasing radiation across Europe, which they did. Ukrainians' heroic resistance, armed by the US and NATO. That's stunning, isn't it? Ukraine's heroic resistance was armed by NATO. That's the war. And so is US. We could be in a shooting war, which is true. But that's what I'm talking about. All this media is like, come on, yeah, let's do it. Let's get it on. That's what you're seeing, right? They're trying to set that stage. The White House is preparing contingency plans if a cornered Putin uses chemical, biological, or nuclear weapons. Yeah, what was it Biden said a couple of days ago? Putin can't stay in charge. Vladimir Putin. Fukushima. Looks like a lot of censorship lately, eh? Nuclear annihilation. Yeah, I'll check it out. Yeah, pretty good censorship, I noticed. My video from last night, I barely got any thumbs up on that after the show. Didn't move for 12, 14 hours. If Swanee D is watching this, how you doing, Swanee? When you go to my front page, right, you usually see videos. So this video won't show up for 12 hours on this page, but if you click when you come to my site, always click and go past live streams. And because I'm still streaming, it's not going to show up there. But the most recent stream will always show up right there in past live streams. It won't show up for uploads because that's different, right? So that Nuclear Scumbag show, this one here, you'll be able to find this in 10 minutes after it's over in past live streams. It'll show up there. And so that's the one you always check for my most recent live stream would be that one. I got to go in. Every show, I typically will go in here immediately when the show starts. And I'll scroll all the way down to the bottom. When the show is live, I'll do this right away. And recheck this box in case somebody has the video embedded. It won't play unless I click that again. And I have to do that 3 times. When I first put the preamble up, then I have to go back in and set it again right away because now it's unchecked. And then the minute I go live, I have to go in and check it again 3 times. So that websites that embed the video will actually be there for them to see and will play. As YouTube has that restricted. And I can't share with my subscribers after the show. That button is not available on my site from the second that I created it. And so how did our poll go tonight? Bring that up. Is Chernobyl really the world's worst nuclear accident? 62 votes, 97% says no. Silly. Now, I know you folks know better than that. I know you folks are not gullible. We do these polls. You guys are always dead on. But a lot of people don't understand the big picture like the regulars. And so that helps the people that are not quite up to speed ask, like, what? That's a weird question. And they'll be like, wow, everybody says no. And then we show the evidence at the same time, right? It's a very effective thing that we do here. I'm going to end that. End it. No. I'm burnt out. That was a good show. A lot of work today. Made it. Still alive. Yes. Yeah. Good night, Stephen Young. I'm glad you're feeling a bit better. I know it takes a long time, and exercise and therapy is the best thing you can do. Dana Nasana, thank you, Dana. Richard, Patrick, Diane, Sunshine, Wolf, Chelsea, Richard, Albert, James Lucid. Hey, buddy. Good night, everybody. God bless everybody. Hugs for everybody. Don Vincent. Ooh, is that a long show again tonight? It is what it is. Not much I can do about it. Whatever the cycle throws at me, that's what I'm kind of stuck with, right? I'll read the comments later. Nirad Eloft. Good night. Port Angeles. And Brandon. Yes, we got everybody. What did I do to you here? Yeah, so Same time tomorrow night. Hopefully, everything goes okay. Adrian Johnson, I'll be back tomorrow night with another cycle of lunatics and crazies. Never boring. Randy. And who else we got here? Let me see. Yeah. The eyesight is not what it used to be. Mike, you're welcome. Kevin Blanche, hi Kevin. Patrick, get everybody. We're almost down to the vote here. And we know we got a night in. I always like scrolling down. Sometimes I catch some good stuff, and sometimes it's just nice to say hi to everybody. It's nice to kind of have a cooling down period for a few minutes to Albert. Dogs Bollocks, Dogs Bollocks. Jeff Poor. Wow, we got lots of people come through tonight. We have a great night and a great day tomorrow. I'll be hard at work. Darlene Thinker. Darlene Thinker, Diana Sunshine. Robert. I think we got everybody. Almost. CFINATR. Yeah. Looks like we done it. Probably missed a few people. Yeah, see Kevin. That's Kevin Blanche I'm talking to, if anybody's trying to confused about it. Did we get through everybody? Looks good. And to everybody who's watching this later tonight or sitting back now, you have a great night. And everybody that's watching this later, hugs for you and your friends and your families and your loved ones. Obsolete Optics. I was just going to say, where's Obsolete Optics to tonight? Yeah, I got 54 thumbs up on my end. 54 thumbs up. We'll see everybody. Because it's after midnight now, my time, I guess. Let me check here. Yeah, it's quarter after midnight. It was a good show tonight. A lot of really good information just tonight. Not too many pictures for a change. Okay, well, good night, everybody. God bless you and your friends and your families and your loved ones. We'll see everybody tomorrow night. I'm pretty tuckered. I'll get some sleep. We'll get up and do it all again tomorrow. I appreciate everybody coming by. It means a lot. Have a great time. See everybody soon. Take care, folks.